So anytime I read the Bible and my attention, my ears are perked up because something I'm reading is just so odd or so weird, I try and pay extra careful attention to that spot. I try and go over a little bit more carefully and look into it, dig into it a little bit deeper, because at least for me, this is one of the best indicators that not only is there something to learn here, there's some sort of thing that needs worked out so I can understand that a bit better, but also it might indicate that I am at that moment more receptive to learning what is there and internalizing that lesson because I'm interested in it. So I try and pay attention there. And this is great because the Bible is full of weird stuff. Now, let's translate that to my personal study. I am going through the book of Isaiah. I've been working through it verse by verse, chapter by chapter, and it's been pretty good. There's a lot more interest that I have in the book of Isaiah than I thought I would. I felt like, obviously it's important, it's a part of the Bible, but to me, it just seemed so long and dense, tedious, a little bit boring. And I'm not going to lie, there are some parts in here where I'm just like, this is like the fourth prophecy against Egypt that seems to say the exact same thing. Did we need four of them? And I do get a little bogged down, a little bit like that's kind of a drier section. But for the most part, it's been really cool because, so much of the rest of Scripture draws from Isaiah. It's a really important book for the New Testament writers especially. So certain things that I'd read in the New Testament that I understood like came from the Old Testament very, very often. It's like from Isaiah, Psalms, maybe somewhere in the Torah, but Isaiah has a lot of moments of being referenced in the New Testament. There's some obvious ones like unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Very, very common verse straight out of the book of Isaiah, but many more that I'm reading through and I'm like, oh, I recognize the phrasing of that. And it's, because it comes from a New Testament passage that was drawing on the book of Isaiah. So it's really cool to see kind of the original source material that those authors were drawing on. But also, Isaiah is cool because it is full of really weird stuff, and I just kind of like that. But a few days ago, right now I'm in like chapter 22, moving into 23. But a few days ago I was in chapter 20. It's a really short chapter, and something in there caught my attention, struck me a little bit odd, and I ended up going back and rereading it and being like, okay, yeah, I understand what's going on there. And I thought I could move on, but for the past few days, I've not been able to get it out of my head. It's just been rattling around in there, rolling around and bringing up all kinds of thoughts, especially like personal reflection thoughts. And so that's a good thing. I'm paying close attention to that. I looked into this section to understand what it was saying, but it's still rattling around, convicting me of things just over the past few days. And so I thought, all right, let's talk about this because this is a really good way, I think anyways, to teach things, not just to tell people this is interesting, you should find this interesting, but to show this is why I find this interesting. So hopefully that resonates with you. Maybe the section won't be as odd to you as it was to me. But if I do one of two things, I'll be happy with this episode. One, if you get a higher esteem of the prophet Isaiah, I'll have done my job. I think these people, the patriarchs, the heroes of the Bible, the men and women who lived faithful lives and struggled through different things are held up as our examples of what to do and what not to do. So anytime we can look at a strength of a certain character and say, wow, like that is a wonderful quality they had, I think we kind of set them up as a little bit of a beacon to exemplify. We see that they led a faithful life following after God. We'd like to do that same thing. So emulate them as they emulate God, as Paul says in the New Testament. So if you can raise your esteem of Isaiah as this section did for me, wonderful. And also the second thing that this section did for me was it gave me a character goal to work towards, something that Isaiah was doing that wasn't just like, wow, good for him. It was like, man, I want to be more like that. I want to do that. So those are kind of my two goals for this episode. And even if you just find that section that we're going to go through a little bit odd and want to look into it more for yourself, definitely a successful episode. So Isaiah 20, after a series of prophecies regarding various nations that are kind of entering into world conflict, God delivers Isaiah 20. And the context of this chapter is Assyria is on the move. They are kind of one of the global powers at this point. They're swallowing up cities, swallowing up land, becoming more and more powerful as they sweep across the nations. And so God has some words to say, not only about Assyria, but about Jerusalem and Judea, about Israel and the northern tribes, about Egypt and Cush, about Edom, about all these nations that are going to be affected by this turning point in world history as Assyria begins to dominate through this region. And Israel is getting really, really nervous because Assyria has not only begun to take over more and more land, but they've also infringed upon the promised land, taking over the city of Ashdod, which was a very prominent city in the southwest of the promised land, most often associated with Philistines, but still well within the land of promise. And they've taken that land. So they're at the doorstep of Jerusalem. I mean, not exactly, it's not super close, but, Assyria is a big army, and they're getting closer. Clearly, they've kind of set their steps in the direction of Jerusalem and Judea. So the people are getting very, very nervous, even though God has promised them that he would take care of them, that he would watch out for them, and that he would spare them Assyrian captivity. The northern 10 tribes would not be so lucky. They would be taken over. But Judea and Jerusalem, they're going to be okay in this section of world cataclysm. And so they should be trusting in God, but instead they are looking to some of their lesser enemies to partner with them as allies. And they, by doing this, they make themselves subservient to these enemies. They have to pay, certain tributes to these nations and basically act as vassal states to their enemies. And God doesn't want this. He's saying, I promised you good things. I promised you protection. Why are you not listening to me? Why are you not obeying me, trusting in me? I want this from you, and I want to protect you, but you're going about things in such a poor way. I have to show you that that's not going to work out for you. And this is where we get Isaiah chapter 20. Now, in the midst of Isaiah 20, there are just a few short verses that are so weird of Isaiah pantomiming something that serves as a prophecy of God. And we're going to read through that section starting in verse 2. So in the midst of this, it says, at that time, meaning when Assyria took over Ashdod, they're at the doorstep of Judea. At that time, the Lord spoke by Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saying, go and loose the sackcloth from your waist and take off your sandals from your feet. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. So, really weird request, right? Like Isaiah is going to be naked as he prophesies. That's what God has asked him to do. He's already wearing sackcloth. That's already a sign of humility and lowliness. That would have been something that people looked at and kind of jeered at and made fun of already. He has definitely not esteemed himself as something high and lifted up. He has already lowered himself, and God says, do it even further. Completely naked. And this is what he has asked Isaiah to do. And maybe this doesn't strike you as super weird. You know the stories of the prophets. Maybe you're familiar with prophets like Ezekiel or Jeremiah, especially Ezekiel. He's always doing some odd stuff at God's request to visually show Israel the messages from God. So we know, prophets normally, or at least regularly, have to do things where they're living in very unique ways to visibly express or draw attention to a very important point that God is trying to make. But what's weird is, I often think about this with the prophets, but certain ones, like Ezekiel, like Jeremiah, not often Isaiah. So it's very interesting that in this, series of prophecy, I always think of Isaiah as like a kingly prophet. He speaks to Hezekiah. He seems to be in good favor with his people, generally speaking. People are listening to him. So I kind of thought, all right, Isaiah's, socially okay. He's fairly prominent. He's fairly well respected. But now he's doing some weird stuff. And I don't often associate this with this prophet, but he does. For 3 years, Isaiah is naked. And that's what I want to point out from this next section that I think is so important, because this is where it really started being just absolutely bizarre to me. It says, and he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Then the Lord said, as if no time has passed, but it has. Then the Lord said, as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign and a portent against Egypt and Cush, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian captives and the Cushite exiles, both the young and the old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered, the nakedness of Egypt. So this is what is in verses 3 and 4. So for 3 years, Isaiah has done this. And many people might want to explain away the naked thing. Like, well, surely in the Hebrew it means something different. Surely God didn't want him to be completely naked. Maybe just it was like bare-chested or something. Honestly, I have not looked up the Hebrew word, so I don't know. But the imagery, I think, makes it very clear that this is a lot more than just bare-chested or, like bare in some ways, like barefoot and maybe head uncovered, something like that. Like maybe it has some cultural meaning that's not just naked. But immediately after it says, as Isaiah has been naked for 3 years, Egypt and Cush will be led away bare butt. I mean, completely naked. It's very explicit how that sounds. So at least in my view, I see God saying, Isaiah, be naked, and Isaiah was naked because of how explicit the revealing of that prophecy is. If he's just bare-chested, then he says, as Isaiah is naked, Egypt and Cush will be led away naked. He wouldn't need to say, bare buttocks. Like that is just, it's so specific that I have to imagine, the parallel was there in how Isaiah was being looked at in this humiliation, in this shame, to what Egypt and Cush were about to go through. But for 3 years, Isaiah followed this command of God, and we only get the explanation as to why this happened after the 3 years. God issues a command which to anybody would sound and feel ridiculous, and Isaiah follows it for 3 years, potentially not even knowing himself why he's supposed to do this. We don't get an indication that Isaiah was like in on the secret. It just says, Isaiah, do this, and Isaiah did. That's it. But even if he did know, even if you want to say, well, God wouldn't keep that from him, he'd tell him why he's doing it, fine, but he didn't get to explain it to the people until the 3 years were up. So still, he's in this period of shame where even if he understands the importance of why, he can't have other people understand it. So he's still living as if he has no clue why he's doing this because he can't vindicate himself. He can't be socially justified. He just has to do this thing and appear like this before the people. Now, the reason for why he's doing this is important to note. I don't want to skip over that. It's not really the focus of this episode, but it is important to note that Assyria is getting stronger. God's trying to illustrate kind of the fruitlessness of allying with their enemies to Judea. And he's saying, look, they're going to be taken away themselves. What is allying with them going to help you? It's not. Trust in me. I've promised to protect you from this captivity. Trust that I'm going to keep my promises. So yes, it's important to note why God is doing this, why God is having Isaiah illustrate this. And the message is important. I've promised you something and you're behaving faithlessly. And I need you to lock in. I need you to stay with me here. Pay attention to this. It's important. So, okay, this is why God's doing it. But Isaiah either doesn't know this or can't explain this to people. And to me, this points to an incredible faith that Isaiah has to live in humiliation with either no explanation to himself as to why he's having to live this way or no explanation that he can offer to others to alleviate the situation just a little bit. All he has is a command of nakedness. That's it. And it says he does. Now, as I've been thinking about this over the past few days, it made me realize just how much I value understanding. And while understanding is a good thing, it's not bad at all. I think God wants us to pursue understanding. Trust is even more important. The minute my need to understand gets in the way of trusting God is the minute that I need to change, the minute I need to grow, and the minute I'm doing something wrong. I've got my priorities out of order. I'm perhaps idolizing understanding. Now, I can still seek understanding, and I should, as I choose to trust in God while I still lack it. I can ask God to explain it to me. I can say, why are you having me do this? Why do you want this from me? Why don't you do this other thing for me? Or where are you? These are all things I can ask God and question God about. I think it's okay to do this. We see people pleading with God for understanding all throughout the scriptures. So I think this is okay. But it would be very like me, if I'm honest with myself, to say, I'll trust when I'm certain, or I'll obey when I know why I'm called to do this thing. And this is an imbalance. This is inappropriate. And what's crazy about this to me is that I have the benefit of living on the other side of the cross. Now, Isaiah was a prophet from God. Perhaps he had things revealed to him about what God was doing, but I have lived to the other side of it. I have seen it happen. Not physically, I didn't live during that time, but I have it verified and assured to me that that has been accomplished. Jesus spoke the words, "It is finished," and I live on the other side of that work. I have the benefit of having understood that God came to earth to live as a human being, to know what it's like to live like I do. Isaiah had the promise of that, but I've seen it happen. I have the benefit of knowing that God suffered in my place for my sins and will take anything to spare me. I know, because I've seen it, that God wants good for me, and he died to prove it to me. And yet, I don't know that I have the faith that Isaiah has in this moment. Isaiah, at least historically, did not have all of that. He had it promised to him. Maybe he saw it in part, but it's done. I'm on the other side of it. I'm living on this side of the cross, and Isaiah was not. And so I think this is an area of my faith where I still lack, and I want to be honest about that. Just 2 verses in a really short chapter of Isaiah, and I feel convicted. Not to go naked and barefoot in the streets prophesying about the ancient nations of Egypt and Cush. No, absolutely not. But to have faith like Isaiah did, who heard God say, "Go," and went for 3 years, trusting that God knew that what he was doing and what he was asking for was in fact best for everybody. The faith that Isaiah had to deny himself his own need for understanding, or for social justification, or for comfort, and living a trust in God that I'd really like to have.